Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is someone who likes putting things together. A New Yorker and former athlete, he came to the attention of the gaming world with his game Pipeline. My guest this week is Ryan Courtney. Ryan, welcome to the cabin.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question is, how difficult was it for you to choose the 5 games to take to the cabin?
I pretty much just winged it. I don't actually own all that many games. I probably have less than 10 that haven't even been cannibalized or stripped apart for their pieces to make prototypes. So yeah, pretty difficult.
And is this because you live in New York and space is at a premium, or are you just not a collector?
I am just not a collector. I've purchased more games, but a lot of my games have just been given to the Columbia Games Library. So if I'm not using it, I feel like I should just give it to the library and let other people use it. And then if I really feel like using it, I'll just go up to Columbia and play.
And so you said in the notes that you sent me that you rarely sort of play published games anymore. Is that a drawback of being a designer, that you sort of relinquish the hobby part of gaming?
I think it changes your mentality to how you're playing games. So it can be difficult to sort of divorce yourself from overanalyzing them and actually just sitting there and enjoying them.
And do you like the kind of games that you design? Because often I speak to designers and they say, if I'm a Euro designer and I play something like Social Deduction, I can kind of turn my analytical brain off for that because it's not something that's in my wheelhouse. I mean, are you a sort of omni gamer, or are you someone who, very much likes those kind of resource management, sort of logistics type games?
Yeah, so when I was a consumer, when I was more into the hobby for fun or for me to play, I had very strict tastes. So I like the heaviest optimization style games that you can find, and I pretty much stuck only to that. Now that I'm designing, it's very important for me to play a range of games so that, one, I can sort of grab stuff from different areas and combine them. I think that tends to make games more interesting, and you add new things into new spaces. It's essentially just what creativity is. And so, yes, I play much more types of games now. I also oftentimes just watch video reviews of games. So I'll just watch that to get the gist of what a game is. If I can watch a video review that does a decent amount of depth in, 10 minutes, that can often be a lot better for me than actually playing the game.
And are you one of those blessed people who can kind of divine whether you'll like the game or not from reading the rule book?
I actually don't read rule books all that much. But yes, I think I have a pretty good idea whether I will like a game or not prior to playing it. But again, I think that's just because as a consumer, I have such very specific tastes that there's not that much there's not much wiggle room there.
So let's go back to the beginning then. So where did you grow up, and to what extent do you think that shaped the person you are today?
So I didn't really grow up in anywhere in particular. Uh, I moved around quite a bit as a child. And I would say, I think now at this point, New York City is the place that I've lived the absolute longest. Uh, as far as a past goes, I don't really think about my past very much. And of course, nothing bad happened in my past or anything like that. I'm just a pretty forward-facing kind of guy, and I just don't. Yeah, I always just sort of think, where can I go in the present and move forward from here. As far as how's it shaped me or how did I become a game designer, I certainly had no plan or intention to become a game designer. And then there was a lot of things along the path to becoming a game designer. And path is even the wrong word, right? Like, I tried a lot of things that I thought I wanted to do, and I failed at a lot of those things. And then at some point, I ended up being like, okay, this game design thing seems to be working pretty well. And so I sort of went with it. So it was definitely not intentional. I definitely thought I wanted to do a lot of other things. But now at this point, I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing.
And so do you think then that the fact that you didn't... So I grew up in a small country town. I was there till I was 18. I basically didn't travel anywhere till I was 18. And so I have sort of strong nostalgia for those childhood days walking through fields. Do you think the fact that you moved around a lot as a kid means that you kind of didn't put roots down, and so forward momentum is kind of the story of your life?
I think it probably taught me to be more willing to explore things. So things were always going to be new for me because I was constantly in a new place. And I do thrive off of that. I'm always dabbling in a variety of different things. I'm pretty much willing to try just about anything once. And I think that helps me when it comes to design, because I have experiences sometimes in some sort of far-fetched or weird places, and then I can take ideas from that and pull them into my designs.
And so you also said in the notes that you sent me that you were into athletics. What kind of athletics were you into, and why did it appeal?
My whole family was into athletics, so I started in like the traditional stuff. So here in America, so your baseball, soccer. I attempted basketball, but I'm quite average height. So that was not a successful sport for me. And then I moved into wrestling, and that was a sport. And yeah, I did wrestling and football, and I did weightlifting. So I ended up being decently good at wrestling and weightlifting. And then in college, I did mixed martial arts.
And, you know, when I think of sort of American schools, I think of that classic sort of separation, you know, jocks and nerds. Was that the case in the schools that you were in? And were you very much sort of in the jock camp?
I don't know if was that big of a split. A lot of our smartest kids were also in athletics. So no, I don't know that there was a huge split there.
And so a lot
of the classes that we took we would have our coaches be our teachers, and like my physics teacher was our wrestling coach. So I don't know that there was a drastic thing there. I mean, I don't think people were really that antagonistic.
And so when did games enter your life then? Because you said in the notes, and we kind of share this, I think. You said you're not really into any other kind of nerd pursuits. And I got into games in my 30s and didn't do anything. I wasn't into comic books and all of that sort of stuff growing up particularly. And yet games really bit me, and I really got into them. And when did they enter your life, and what appealed to you about them?
So I would have been playing like the mass market games as a kid on occasion, and I think I played a little bit of Magic the Gathering at some point in there, but not seriously. When I really got into the hobby games was in my mid-20s. I was in grad school, and I was living off of a grad school stipend, and I was also living in New York, and I just simply couldn't afford to do many of the entertainment options here. Going out to eat here was quite expensive. Going out to the bars was expensive. So I was like, okay, let's see if I can buy a couple of these games. And so I just went into a store and bought a couple of games. Some of them, of course, I didn't know what I was doing, so some of them were not so great. But a couple of them really stuck, and I played, for instance, I think I played Carcassonne probably over 100 times. So yeah, just it was a monetary thing. I needed a way to entertain myself, and board games, believe it or not, for me were very cheap. I know that some collectors, they spend quite a bit, but for me, I just picked a couple of them and just replayed them over and over again.
And so you've said that the fact that you had a journey to design is not the correct way to describe it. So when did you get the idea that, okay, I can play these things and it's a nice distraction, but also I think I have the aptitude to make them too?
So when I was in grad school, there was a company called Siftio. They make this. They're no longer a company, but they were making this piece of hardware that was sort of a hybrid between a digital game and a tabletop game. And so they were fairly brand new at the time, so they were looking for designers and whatnot. And so they ran what's called a game jam. And this game jam was in the city, and it was 48 hours. And so a buddy of mine and I we were like, okay, that would be fun to just go do on a weekend. So we went up and we did the game jam. We ended up winning the game jam, and we ended up getting contracts to make game for them, or a contract to make a game for them. So that was sort of when I realized, okay, I could potentially do this, not full-time professionally, but it is a way to give myself a little bit of extra income in grad school.
So your first game then is very much not the kind of game that you say you prefer to play, and this is Letter Jam. So there are loads of word games out there. Why is it this one that you've picked?
Okay, so I guess one thing that I should sort of start with the word games is that I did play word games with my mother quite a bit when I was younger, and even into college, I would play Scrabble with my mom quite a bit. So there is probably a nostalgia factor behind these word games. But Letter Jam, I like, and this will, you say that they're different, but I actually think that there's some commonalities between these. So in my opinion, Letter Jam has quite a high skill level. And I think most of the games that I put on this list do have that. And that's something that I'm looking for in most of the games that I'm playing. Another thing about Letter Jam that I really like is the level, it's a co-op game, and it's a co-op game where it's not a one-player co-op game, right? So what I mean by that is one person couldn't just play the whole game by themselves and just and be like, okay, you do this, right? So Letter Jam doesn't do that. So that's one important thing for the co-op aspect, for me at least. And then I really enjoy the amount of empathy required to play that game. So you have to think about, what vocabulary do you know? What vocabulary do your teammates know? what are they currently thinking about, right? Like, if have previous clues been sort of, priming people to be thinking about a certain topic, right? So you have to think about all these different things. You have to really empathize with all the other players and figure out a way to communicate with people effectively with these simple clues. So yeah, high skill ceiling, and then with this game, like high empathy, which I find really, really fascinating. And then it's got also dirt simple rules. Uh, so I'm very impressed by what this game is able to do with really so little. It's got very few components, very few rules, but it really creates quite an impressive dynamic.
I mean, how important is because when you think about sort of heavy economic games, heavy logistic games, there can be this idea that they're very much sort of head down at the board, and very sort of almost kind of, if they're not antagonistic, they're solitary pursuits. I mean, to what extent is gaming for you about connecting with the people around the table?
So I very much like to be playing against or with another human. So I don't do a lot of solo style gaming typically. I do find playing against a human, I like the feeling of sort of like wittiness or cleverness, right? That happens when you play with a human. So I would say that it's important, but important in certain contexts, right? So in a heavy game, I do want to be playing against an opponent. I don't want to be playing just against myself. But again, I like whenever I have to think a lot about what my opponent is going to do. And I particularly like zero-sum games, like two-player zero-sum. So most of the games I'll play at two-player only. I have a pretty strong preference for that. And, while I'm playing the heavy game, I am thinking very much what my opponent wants to be doing and what they can do to counter me and all those things. And so there is a lot of thought about what my, like what's going on across the table for me. It's not just me working on my own thing. It is me thinking about what are they doing as well.
And so what do you think the big appeal for word games is? I played Wordsy at the weekend, and Wordsy has a real nice dynamic between showing off that you know big words and actually trying to score points. Is it about showing off your vocabulary and how clever you are?
I think for some people it probably is. For me, not so much. I pretty much avoid any attention that comes my way as much as possible. For me, I think with word games, there's a level of surprise that they can invoke. So a lot of times when you have these games that are sort of word games that have like word association, or even letter jam, right? Somebody will provide a clue, and I just it'll be tough to figure out. But then when you do figure it out, or when it gets told to you after the round because they're upset that you didn't figure it out, there's a level of surprise there, and it could be I like that aspect where it feels really clever how those things are associated. A lot of games I don't think have that level of surprise. So when I'm playing more of the heavier type games that are pretty much pure math, I'm pretty able to look ahead in those games. So I can look several moves ahead, and I don't get surprised in those games as often. But with word games, I do get surprised, and I enjoy that.
So I want to go on now and talk about you as a designer. So, you mentioned that your first game jam, you ended up getting a job from it. Do you think that you have some sort of innate talent for game design?
So I would definitely be wary of the term talent. So in my opinion, game design is a learned skill. So when I first started, I did do well on that game jam, but my stuff was pretty garbage. And same with the board games. When I started making the first board games that I made, they were completely garbage. And I've thrown away a lot of designs, right? But just like any other learned skill, you find someone to teach you, you teach yourself, and then you practice a lot, right? And at this point, I've been practicing for many years, and I just garbage less often, right? Nobody else has to see all the ones that fail, right? Most of them don't even see the light of day. And then I have a small group that I might show some that do get to see the light of day for, a week, and those get tossed too. But no, I don't think that there's anything all magical there or innate. It's just practice, and what gets released tends to be the stuff that is of better quality than the rest of this stuff that you work on.
And so, how did the idea for Pipeline come to you?
Yeah, so at the time I was working on making these auto generators and solvers for puzzle game apps, mobile apps. So there's a game called Flow. Anyways, it's just puzzle apps for mobile devices. I was trying to make something so that I could just generate a whole bunch of levels for these things and then have solvers for them so that we could say whether you did, how well you did and all those types of things. And at the same time, this was sort of around the same time that I was really getting into board games as a consumer. And so I was really into the business simulators. And so I basically took ideas from the mobile apps, this puzzly aspect, and then combined it with a business simulator. And I was going at that point to New York City Playtest, which is a playtest meetup here in the city. It had like Emerson Matsuuchi, Gil Hova, a variety of different game designers, and they were all working in tabletop. And I was bringing in paper prototypes for mobile games. And I was like, maybe I'll try one of these tabletop games. And so that's where Pipeline came from. It was just sort of on a whim. I was like, maybe this is worth doing since everybody else at this group is doing board games.
And so, what was the development process? Did it take a long time, or was it one of those ideas that sort of almost appeared fully formed?
So design-wise, most of my games are very quick. So I think Pipeline took less than maybe a month, definitely less than a month to make the design, and that probably makes up 85% of the game. Pretty much the entire core. Very, very little of the core itself changed. We did strip a lot out of that game before releasing it to try to make it a little simpler and bring it a little bit less to a niche audience. But development for the game took forever. I was very lucky. I met Tim Kaiser online. It was fairly random. Somebody had just brought up that I was doing playtesting online, and he showed up one time, and then he just never left. So that was very, very fortunate. He's helped me develop most of my games since then. But yeah, the development process, years. The design process, usually almost always a couple of weeks to a month.
And so you said in the notes that you sent me that you're an avid reader of non-fiction. Does that in any way contribute to the kind of games you design, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to read into a whole bunch of different domains. Typically, it does tend to be sort of the hard domains, like the hard sciences. So it tends to be sciences and maths, engineering, like the STEM related type things. But I will oftentimes get a whole bunch of books and read into a topic, and then I will essentially come up with a system that I believe, like I'll basically abstract what I believe the systems are in that reading that I'm doing. And of course, I'm not making educational games. So I have a huge amount of artistic liberty in what these systems end up being, right? So I'm not saying you play Pipeline and all of a sudden you can become a petroleum engineer or anything like that. But I try to think about what are some of the things that would be occurring in that type of industry, and then make an abstraction of that with the game. I did that with Bear Raid. I looked at, I bought a whole bunch of books on Wall Street, and I looked at how different things were manipulating the stock market. And then I made essentially a toy that I felt invoked, loosely some of the feelings that I thought I was reading about in those books.
It's people often, the way you become professional in something is not a sort of day-to-day thing. You don't wake up one morning and think, oh, I'm suddenly this. But I mean, at what point did you feel confident enough to be able to say, I'm a game designer now?
For me, I don't really think about that all that much. I don't really worry about the labels for myself. So I assume, like, for me, if I'm putting any time in, or if I'm devoting some amount of time to game design, I guess that by default makes me a game designer. And if I stop, then I guess at that point I become an ex-game designer. Kind of like with athletics, right? Like, when I was participating in athletics, I guess I would have considered myself an athlete at that time. Now that I'm unfortunately never doing any physical activity, I couldn't consider myself an athlete anymore.
So your next game then is another one that a heavy gamer might be surprised that they choose. And this is So Clover. Why this one?
So it's very similar to Letter Jam, but I think it uses a little bit of a different skill. So with Letter Jam, you're sort of looking at patterns of individual characters, right? And actually spelling matters. So they give the same dynamic, the same sort of feel for me, but they just use different skills. And for certain people, So Clover works better, and for other people, Letter Jam works better. So I have friends who they're quite good at association, but they're not the best spellers. So Clover can be a good fit for them. So yeah, I want a word game. I feel like these two cover the types of word games that I'm looking for, and I can find an audience for each of them. So because they have the two different skills, I can pull out the one or the other based off of what I know about the people I'm playing with.
And to what extent do you think this game owes a debt? And I guess modern word games in general owe a debt to code names.
Right. I mean, this is definitely it. I mean, I guess I can't say what the designer knew or didn't know, but one would imagine that the designer learned a lot from Codenames on this game. It feels like a spin-off of Codenames for sure.
And so I played this at the weekend, and it was very silly. Is this as close when we played it? Is this as close as you get to party games?
Probably. And again, even this game, I tend to play it at 2-player only. So I know it on the box. I think the box says it starts at 3-player, but I don't see why it doesn't work at 2. And so again, I tend to play even this one at 2-player. I played Letter Jam at 2-player as well. So on occasion, I do play it at a bigger player count, and it can be fun to have the chit chat where people are arguing, about, oh no, that one definitely is this one. And so that can be fun. So yeah, probably as close to a party game as I will typically play.
So I want to talk to you now about something that you've had experience with and sort of get your views on it. And this is Kickstarter. So your games have been published through Kickstarter. What are the pitfalls and the advantages of the platform do you see?
So the main upside is marketing. There are gamers, the community of gamers is already there, right? And so they're looking for games there. And if you are a small company, then and even big companies, right? Like it still is you see big companies like CMON and, big companies do it too. But it's an area where there's already a whole bunch of folks looking for games, and they're comfortable with that platform, and they can build up hype around your games. For small companies, capital also matters. So because we have to manufacture these things and then get them, across the ocean to ship out. If you're a small company, capital matters. So my games so far have been with fairly small companies, particularly Pipeline with Capstone. At the time, Capstone Games was quite new. And so I don't know that they could have done Pipeline without Kickstarter. And then my upcoming game, Trailblazers, is being done with Bitewing Games. They are brand new. They've done one project before, and 100% they couldn't do it without Kickstarter. So that's definitely the upside. The downsides, obviously, they take a cut, right? So Kickstarter takes some of your money, or some of the money for what they provide. And another tough thing is things like shipping can be tough. So one thing that I'm quite aware of right now for my upcoming game is that game has like a travel version, and that travel version isn't terribly expensive. But for like for international backers, right, I want to make sure that there's options for those folks where the shipping doesn't just completely crush them, right? And so when you're doing direct to consumer type stuff like this, shipping can be pretty expensive. And so whereas compared to say like retail, where you ship you ship pallets out to different places and people don't get quite as burned on shipping. I would say shipping is a tough one, and that's something that we're trying to work around. So in the upcoming game, for instance, we're going to provide print and play files, for people who potentially couldn't get the game, or, they could get the game, but the shipping might be too expensive for them.
And so, you still license your designs to publishers and publish through publishers. And one of the great things about Kickstarter is it kind of allows creators to achieve their own dreams. Have you ever thought about entering the murky world of publishing yourself?
Yeah, all the time, probably daily. And I get actually a lot of pressure from folks to do it myself as well. And there's a couple of reasons why I haven't done that yet. One is I really do enjoy designing. And when you start working on becoming a publisher, your time gets split. And so I would end up designing a lot less because I'd have to put time in these other things. The other thing is like, while it's easy to sort of daydream about doing it yourself and not ever butting heads with publishers, the reality is that butting heads with them is really healthy for your project, and I think it makes your projects better. So they will call you out on if your game's not up to par, or if something needs to be changed, they'll call you out on it. They've got skin in the game. They don't want to lose their money, And so you've got somebody who can keep you in check. So I think that that's an important thing. And if I were to do it by myself, I would have to find somebody who would sit there and, keep me in check, make sure that everything I'm putting out is of top-notch quality.
And so I've never launched a Kickstarter myself, obviously, but how does it feel on that first day when the button is pressed?
So I typically force myself to sleep in. I usually wake up a couple hours after it started, and then I assess the damage from there. So I don't want to see it at the beginning. So I'm sleeping 100%.
And at the end?
At the end, if it goes good, great. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah. I mean, the reason I'm sleeping is because obviously I would be nervous, right? And so once I see that it's doing okay, then it's a major relief for me, and then then I get excited whenever backers end up getting their copies. It's incredibly fun to watch other people post onto social media or wherever that they've got their new game.
So, your next game then is more in the wheelhouse of the heavy gamer, and this is Madeira. What is it about Madeira that appeals to you?
So, yeah, it's another high skill cap game, and I definitely really enjoy optimization style games, and this fits right into there. This one, I feel like you can really hose your opponent, so you can really get into your opponent's way. Like there's these areas that sort of get pinched, and if you get in there and you make a move that squeezes people, you can really knock them off of their intended path in this game. It does have the usage of a little bit of dice, which I'll admit I find a little bit frustrating, but I actually think that maybe that's an aspect that I like, because I cannot look ahead quite as far as I normally would in a purely deterministic game. So it mixes it up just a little bit to have those dice thrown in between rounds. And sometimes it will really hurt you. Like the dice, compared to like the American style games, right? You're not throwing many dice in this game, but again, if you're planning things out, small little changes can make a big difference. And that being said, when I first started gaming, I actually played a lot more Ameritrash before, and I don't know if that's the appropriate term anymore, but I played a lot more of those American area control battle-y type games. I've just sort of moved in a different direction at this point.
And so, does this game feel thematic to you, or is it just a, delightful combination of mechanisms?
Yeah, this one, I don't even know if I'm aware what the theme is. So, yeah, no, this one has essentially, I think this one could have been just about any theme. I know that there's some boats doing something, and there's, a couple of plants doing something, but I don't know why. So no, this is definitely, the theme means absolutely nothing to me in this game.
And so what is because a lot of people, when they get into gaming, they don't dive in straight into heavy games straight away. But what is the appeal of the really heavy game? Why do you think they're the games that you love the most?
So I think that this comes back a little bit to athletics when I was younger. So I really enjoy things that allow me to push myself to my absolute limit. And I'm when I got into gaming, I was looking for something to provide that same sort of challenge that I was getting from, say, weightlifting or from competitive sports. And I feel like when I was first playing, I was getting that, right? So I was getting that type of thing. I think now I've moved a little bit away from that because I'm not getting the same level of challenge like that I was getting from, say, like sports. I think with heavy games, it's challenging because to make them really hard, right? To make them sort of not have a skill limit, it's very difficult to also make them commercially viable at the same time. There's a lot of challenges and obstacles that we sort of have to overcome as a designer to sort of give somebody a sandbox thing to play in where they can always continue to push themselves, right? Like when I was weightlifting, I never got to a point where I was like, I've absolutely capped out. There's not really much more that I can do here, right? There's no reason that board games can't do that as well, but there are definitely some challenges. Like matchmaking is one big challenge, and some of the lifestyle games get around it. Say like Go, chess, Magic the Gathering. Those games essentially don't have a skill cap because they have enough people playing, and then you can match up with people online. But for like these Euro style games, there are a lot of challenges, and they're expensive to make, right? So, and people expect the price to be at a certain level. But if you're only selling 500 copies of something, right, it doesn't really. You can't sell a game for $70 if you're only selling 500 copies and it be, commercially viable. So there's a lot of things that I think we need to work on when it comes to heavy games. But in theory, heavy games should be able to provide you sort of unlimited challenge that you can always get better at, and and always just continue learning. I love learning. It's why I like to read so much. And so, yeah, in theory, heavy games can do this. I don't know that they're doing it at the moment.
So I want to talk now about New York City, because it figures so much in the sort of in worldwide culture, and everyone has an opinion or a sort of feeling around New York. What does New York do for you?
So I think the thing I like about New York the most is that New York simply doesn't care about you or what you do. So I find that quite pleasant, right? So I know this is going to sound weird, but I can't really imagine living anywhere but say like here or like in the middle of the woods somewhere, right? Like those would be like the two places that I think I would thrive in. I just like the privacy. I like being able to work on my own thing and not have anybody care about anything, right? Like my neighbor doesn't, my neighbor doesn't care that I'm making board games, doesn't worry about what I'm doing, and I'm also not worrying about what they're doing. And so it just allows me to be focused on the things I want to do and not have to worry about drama, things like that.
I'm from the countryside, and I've lived in the city now for the last 20 years, and I still feel kind of out of place. And I often think, a city is a city is a city. I mean, how is New York different?
So I don't think that there's many cities that compare density-wise. Tokyo is very dense, and there are some that are dense, but the density here basically means all those super weird things that in a typical place you might have one or two people doing. Here you have plenty of people doing it, and that means that weird things thrive here, and I really love that, right? there's just there are things that I had never even heard about before that are thriving here in New York, and then like I can just go and do that on a Wednesday, right? Like that's very cool to me that I can uh, learn something completely brand new to myself, and then there's going to be a thriving community around it. And I think that's not possible without the density.
And so, no city exemplifies sort of rapid gentrification and, cost of living being absurd and rents being insane in New York. I mean, how does a normal person manage to live there?
Yeah, so I can't exactly speak to like how does somebody at like the median family size, median uh, income do it? I would imagine. I mean, I think that's something like in the U.S., like around four people, and then the median income I know is not terribly high. I'd imagine that would be uh, quite a struggle. But for me personally, I just have very, very little expenses. So I spend money on food and rent. Outside of that, I don't really buy much of anything. Like I said, I don't own a lot of board games. I tend to just not own a lot of things in general. So like ownership of material things doesn't have much of appeal to me. I don't buy stuff. So that's one way. So when all your cost is just food and rent, that helps. Another thing is that I don't own a car, and I'm not really a big proponent of cars. That saves me a ton of money as well with gas and the vehicle. Like in New York City, it would cost a fortune just to park the thing, and that's actually something I would like to see more. So during the pandemic here, we actually shut down a lot of the streets, or like shut down part of the streets to put outdoor eating areas in the streets instead, and it sort of cut down on the cars. I would love to see more people sort of forego car ownership. I think that would be awesome. I'd like to see more people walking and much less driving around in cars. Here in the U.S., in a lot of places, I understand that that's not very practical, but I guess that's a dream of mine: is way less car ownership, way more walking.
And do you feel proud of living in New York? And if so, why?
Proud's probably not the right word, because I didn't accomplish anything to be here. I just moved here, right? But what I will say is I'm super grateful to be surrounded by so many driven folks, right? So there are so many people in so many different domains that are working really hard to excel. And like, one day I can be around, say, like a Michelin star chef. The next day you'd be, next to a lead Broadway performer. The next day you could be at, you could be watching one of the top troops in ballet, right? So you have people who are very driven here and driven to do stuff in, what would be considered potentially like exotic domains, right? So it's not just like, it's not just all bankers or anything like that. It's quite a few different domains, and I just love being around people who are trying to excel, and that's something that's really easy to feed off of. It drives me to also try to do well in design myself.
So your next game then is another big heavy one, and this is Arkwright. How does this game deliver its heaviness? Is it through very complicated rules, or is it one of those games that is, really hard to be good at?
Yeah, so if you look at the rule books, you'd have to assume that it's done by the rules, right? I believe the version I have comes with 2 40-page rule books. So it does. It certainly uses complexity as a way to deliver some of that heaviness. I think that the game is less complex than those rule books make it seem. Uh, I think it is a pretty well designed game. But yeah, I mean, for sure, there is a good amount of rules overhead, and that does make this game hard to get to the table. Uh, but this game is often sort of considered what's called like a spreadsheet game, like this and some of like the 18xx style games, and it looks like a spreadsheet. Like if you pull out the board, it looks kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. But yeah, it's just a whole bunch of math and risk management, and I guess that's what makes it heavy.
And so, when I have conversations with non-gamers, often, they can be kind of bamboozled. Not by the fact that I play board games, that I play board games about, for instance, running a dock and, themes that are on the surface, very mundane. Why is Arkwright fun?
Sure. So I think whether the theme will appeal or not sort of depends on the types of folks that you're hanging out with. So a lot of my friends probably wouldn't be interested in themes like fantasy, like some of the more typical board game themes like fantasy, sci-fi, horror, whatever. So that wouldn't be that appealing to them, but a game that is a business simulator, that would appeal to them. And so I actually find some of these business simulators an easier sell to get my friends to want to play, because they think of them as a little bit more serious, and they can also sort of tie them into the things that they're doing in their own life. Absolutely nothing wrong with fantasy style games or any of those genres. Those obviously have broad appeal as well. But I do think, depending on who you hang out with, some of these games more grounded in science or business or math do appeal to them more. And I also think that one thing that I really have appreciated recently is I feel like I'm seeing more games that are sort of pushing the boundaries on theme. I know, like when Wingspan came out, a lot of people were like, "Who the heck is going to want to play a game about bird watching?" Right? But the thing is a lot of people do. Right? Maybe that wasn't the most appealing theme to the already established hobby board game community, but a lot of people outside of the board game community are into bird watching, and I'm sure there are some in the board game community as well. But that pulled in a whole bunch of new gamers. And then there's a lot of games coming out of sort of these more indie publishers that are sort of pushing the boundaries, like about historical stuff or different movements. And I love that. I love that we're pushing the boundary on what the themes can be, because I do believe that that's pulling in much more folks into gaming who, at times were looking at gaming and be like, well, I'm not really into that geeky stuff, right? Like I'm not into pop culture or comics or those types of things. But board gaming doesn't have to be just that. Board gaming can be a whole bunch of other themes. Arkwright happens to be a business simulator, and that appeals to certain people.
So I want to talk now sort of about your role in the world of gaming and also the future. So where do you see yourself? What position do you see yourself occupying currently in the world of games?
I consider myself brand new. At this point, I just want to make games. That's what I have fun doing, and I'll let other people determine where that puts me. I don't think that I'm established enough to even start thinking about where I am in the world of gaming.
And what do you think your designs do that others don't?
Yeah, so what I often do is I pick a genre and that genre can be just about anything. So Bear Raid was supposed to be a party game, so I picked up, I was like, okay, the party game genre with dice, right? So dice rolling game. And then I try to make the game, on the thinkier end of that genre. So, Pipeline, I was looking at sort of like medium weight euros. And again, I was trying to make something that was, what's sort of right on the, what is right on the threshold of that, what that genre can hold. So something a little bit thinkier, a little bit more challenging, but like in the case of Pipeline, the number of rules weren't a ton. Like I think we did an okay job of keeping the rules fairly simple. And so I think it keeps it in that middle weight class. But then it's still a pretty challenging game. And I think it has a pretty high skill cap. And one thing I do want to clear up as I'm saying that is that just because I try to make sort of like heavier or thinkier type games doesn't mean that like I'm smarter or that I'm more of a skilled designer at all. That's completely backwards, right? So the reason I do it, there's twofold. One is I enjoy those games, but the second is that because I'm new and I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm just trying to pick a small audience that I feel is underserved and, provide a product for them, right? And I'm doing this so that I don't have to compete, right? I don't want to get into, like most games, they sort of cater to the center and they have more of a mass appeal, broader appeal. That area is very scary. There's a lot of really good designers in that space. There are a huge number of games that come out in that space. And I don't want to jump into those pools with that much competition. I'd rather just, find my underserved audience, do my best in there. And, if I can get, as I practice more and as I put out more games, if I can get better and better at that, then maybe I'll try to broaden out and hit more of the larger audiences. But right now, I'm happy to be in small audiences where I have essentially no competition because everybody's going for the juicy center.
So your last game then is one of yours, and this is one of yours that's going to be coming out in the future, and this is Trailblazers. So how did you come up with this design, and what's the game about?
Yeah, so this game was designed along with the other two pipe style games. So this was designed around the same time that Pipeline was, and around the same time as Curious Cargo, for folks who don't know what my other two games are in this space. And yeah, it was just at the time, like I said, I was playing around with these sort of mobile app puzzles, and I like to design games in triplets. So I like to work on one that's in the medium to heavy space, and then I like to work on a couple of smaller ones that focus on less mechanisms than say the heavy one does. So in Trailblazers, I really cut back on everything to just focus just on the puzzly type tile laying part of it. And yeah, that what that does is it means that the rules are super simple. The game's very, very much focused. And so, you know exactly what you're getting in this box, right? Like you're going to get a tile laying game, a fairly light tile laying game, similar, that would be competing maybe with your, I don't know, Calicos, Cascadia, Patchwork, like that sort of space, right? And then maybe a little bit, again, like maybe a little bit more on the thinkier end of that light tile laying space. And the theme for this one is, I like the theme for this one. So this one has a nature theme. So you're building these different routes, hiking, kayaking, and mountain biking. And I think with the pandemic happening, I think a lot of people have been really appreciating the outdoors more. And so, yeah, I think this theme is appealing to folks because of that.
And so, can you give us the logistics then? This is coming out on Kickstarter. When can we back it?
Yeah, so it will go live on August 16th. At least that is the date that we currently have. But it seems like everything's on schedule. So August 16th on Kickstarter.
And sort of how much does it cost and all of that sort of stuff?
So that I am not running the campaign, so I'm going to take some guesses here. But I know that we have 4 tiers. We have a print and play tier, like I had mentioned earlier. We have the Travelers one. Then we have Standard, which is going to be like the 1 to 8 players. It's going to come with the 2 expansions, and then we have a deluxe. And I think Standard is like 50. I believe the travel one is like 35. The deluxe one is maybe 80, and print and play is 5 or 10, something like that. So yeah, don't quote me on those exact prices, but we have a range of different prices. We're trying to make sure that anybody who wants to play the game has an option that will work for them financially. And like I said, we're also including the print and play for folks that, might be from a country where shipping for us being a small company would be potentially quite expensive.
And so finally, the most important question, why should we back this game?
Not the best promoter of my own stuff, to be honest. I'm not a great salesperson, but I think if you like light tile laying games and you want one that is, requires just a little bit more thinking to it, this might be something to check out. And maybe one of the biggest selling points is that it plays 1 to 8 players, but it's simultaneous play. So it's not real time, but you're simultaneously drafting and playing pieces. And so even though it plays up to 8 players, it doesn't really matter what the player count. The game takes only 30 minutes to play. So this is a game where I think you could get the box still in shrink, rip the shrink off, read the rules, teach the rules, and play a game with 8 people. And you should be in and out in around 30 minutes there with everything. Setup is super simple. Probably less than a minute. You just got to shuffle some cards and deal them out. So very quick, very easy to teach. If there's enough thinkiness that I think that people looking for a little bit of additional challenge will still have a lot of fun with it, while still being able to play with their kids or being able to play with with family members or whatever it may be.
So I've got one more question for you then. So you're heading out of New York, escaping the apocalypse, and you go down the road, and although you don't like driving cars, needs must when the apocalypse is coming, and you go round a corner, the back door of the car flies open, 4 of the games fly out down a ravine into a river and are swept away to posterity. Which game do you hope is sitting on the back seat of the car?
All right, so I'm going to cheat on this, and I'm going to say I would grab Tabletop Simulator or one of these games that I have cannibalized that is a box full of pieces, because I would much rather be designing games than playing them.
Thankfully, I'm not very strict with the rules. So if people want to get hold of you, they want to ask you questions about games, find out about Trailblazers, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and Instagram at RCC Games, and my DMs are open, and I love getting questions from folks. So I know folks oftentimes are shy, or think that that somebody won't make time for them or whatever that might be. If you have a question for me, please send it. Whatever it may be, if you are trying to become a game designer, or you need a little bit of help on something that you're working on, send that question and I'll do the best I can to answer it. I really love doing that. I think that that's a really important aspect of being a designer, is making sure that the things that I've learned, hopefully I can pass down to other folks.
Brilliant. Well, Ryan Courtney, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
You can support the show in many ways. You can tell your friends, you can talk about it on social media, you can talk about it in your own blog, podcast or video, or you can support it directly by going to patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or for a one-off donation, hitting the PayPal link at the bottom of the website 5gamesfordoomsday.com. It's these donations that keep the show going. Also, if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on Twitter at 5gamesfordoomsday, or send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. And if I've managed to leg it from the oncoming trusses and my eternal lack of cats, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.